All right, welcome to another movie review stream. My name is Mark McPherson, film critic for movieswithmark.com, twincitiesgeek.com, and filminquiry.com. So it's we're just about at the end of the year here. We just passed Christmas. I'm still plowing through most of the films that I'm just about done with seeing just about everything that I can this year. I've seen well over 230 films this year. Not even counting like old stuff that I've been catching up on, as well as a few things from last year I was catching up on. But yeah, there's a lot to cover, and I've got a lot that I'm going to be covering on this stream as well. So for today's stream, we'll be covering, of course, the latest films, the Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, the final film in the DCEU, coming right out at the end of the year after a slew of like 4 DC Comics films this year, so quite a bunch. I'll also be talking about the new Hayao Miyazaki film, The Boy and the Heron. I'll also be talking about Zack Snyder's new film, Rebel Moon, or the ridiculously long title for it. I swear it was like longer than this, but it's like Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire, even though I think there was like another... I'm pretty sure there's like another subtitle on it, but I'll get to that. I'll also cover the latest iteration, latest musical iteration of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory with the prequel film Wonka, directed by Paul King of Paddington fame. And I'll also be talking about the latest animated film from the Illumination studio, Migration, and I'll also be bringing in one more film here, Past Lives, a film that I was meaning to review, and I finally caught up with that. I will be reviewing it today, and I've been greatly looking forward to talking about it. I also put it in the description, but I'll briefly review The Color Purple, even though I don't have as much to say on it. So I know I'm getting to a little bit late here, but throughout most of this year, I've been trying to get these reviews out earlier. In particular, a few films that I've done early reviews on have been films that I've loved this year, like The Holdovers and Poor Things. Poor Things I reviewed, I think it just expanded into theaters nationwide last weekend, and I've been praising that film for over a month. And trying to get people excited for this new Yorgos Lanthimos film. So if you'd like to stay informed on the latest movies, and I will be making a best of the year list soon, to be informed on all that, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to keep up with the latest movies. So without further ado, we'll get the credits out here, and we will jump into our first film. Fairly easy one to jump right into, with Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. So let me get my notes up here. All right. And we'll jump right into it here in 3, 2, 1. So Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom is the sequel to 2018's Aquaman, and it arrives as the last film of the DC Comics extended movie universe that started with like Man of Steel about 10 years ago. So, with the DCEU ending, and James Gunn is going to take over and reboot all DC Comics films after this, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom kind of arrives as too little too late. It makes sense why they would want to make, a sequel to Aquaman, because the first Aquaman film was great as a crowd pleaser. I do have some issues with it, but I think the film kind of worked when, it was directed by James Wan, and I think Wan has a decent grasp of making fantastical action scenes seem fast and exciting, because of his history with with working with those types of films. But I feel like he gets like a little bit too fast with the sequel here, because, like I said, I kind of was a little bit of a fan of the first Aquaman film. I thought, casting, Jason Momoa was a good choice. He's eccentric. He brings a different energy to Aquaman, which a lot of people were genuinely interested in. I mean, just the casting alone got people excited for, Aquaman, a DC Comics superhero that most people knew, through the Super Friends as being, just this dorky underwater superhero who talks to fish, and everyone, made they all made the jokes that you would make about all the Super Friends characters of that era. So yeah, they kind of reframed, Arthur Curry as more of kind of like this, party animal who just wants to, have fun. And I mean, why wouldn't he? I mean, like, he gets to go underwater. He can talk to sea life. He gets to be the head of this underwater kingdom, and gets to interact with all these, bizarre creatures. Like, there's octopus secret agents, and he gets to ride around, glow in the dark seahorses, and battle all sorts of weird creatures underwater. And I think, to the Lost Kingdom's credit, where I think it works really well is that it establishes Arthur Curry as a superhero kind of has it together. Because like I found that kind of interesting, when you compare him, to like other DC Comics heroes who are kind of like down on their luck. Here's a guy who kind of has his life together. They establish that since the events of the first film, after he, took over Atlantis, after his evil brother Orm, played by Patrick Wilson, tried to, take it over and start a big war with the surface world, Arthur Curry took over the mantle, and he's trying to do better. Like, he's still dealing with like the stuffy politics of his kingdom, but he wants to work with the surface world. He wants to make the world a genuinely better place. And while he's doing all that, he still has time to, hook up with his Atlantean wife, Mira, played by Amber Heard. They still have a decent relationship together. They have a child, and he's becoming like more of a devoted dad. Arthur's still hanging out with his land dad, Tom Curry, played by Tamura Morrison. He still finds time to hang out with him and, ride motorcycles and, share a beer with his old man. And still, through all this, he still has time to, stop some bad guys, stop some pirates at sea, and still have a lot of fun with just being Aquaman. So he more or less kind of has his life together. And I kind of found that fascinating, but the problem is we get all this information delivered really quickly. Within like about like 2 or 3 minutes, we get like all this like really quick. Like Arthur's like, okay, here's where I've gone, since the last film. Here's where I'm currently sitting at in Atlantis, and then it just like keeps going from there. Like, and what I do like about this film though is that it does focus more on the relationship between Arthur and Orm. And how they have to learn to connect together when there's a new threat with this lost kingdom that's been hidden away from Atlantis because it possesses this dark magic and zombies, and it's been unearthed by David Kane, who you might know as Black Manta, Aquaman's nemesis from the comics. Once again, played here by Yahya Abdul-Mateen. And I will give the film credit in this regard. They do use Black Manta more, because they already set up his desire for revenge because Aquaman kind of killed his dad in a brutal exchange. So Black Manta obviously wants revenge, and once he gets a hold of this black trident, and discovers this evil force that will allow him to become more powerful, he just goes like full evil mode. Like even before that happens, he's already got his own battleship with his own henchmen, and they all have like their silly matching uniforms, and they have like this big sonic gun that they can use to fire at the Atlanteans, and his suit's more powerful now. He can shoot more powerful laser beams to stop Aquaman. So I kind of admired that devotion to keeping this like supervillain like strictly evil. Like, he's overwhelmed with this dark magic that's ultimately just gonna destroy the world, and it's all for the sake of revenge. That part I don't mind so much. And honestly, the best part of the film is that, in order to stop Black Manta, Aquaman has to rely on Orm, so the two of them end up working together, and because Orm has spent his entire life underwater within Atlantis, he's not used to the surface world, so they have like a good dynamic here where Arthur is constantly talking about, oh, you got to try cheeseburgers and beer, it's the best. And at the same time, Arthur gets to have fun with Orm's perceptions of the surface world, saying, oh yeah, the cockroaches are a good snack. Have at it. And their chemistry works pretty well here. But the biggest problem with this film is that it never slows down enough to appreciate the elements that work really well. Because like that character dynamic works really well, but I also love how the different worlds that the Aquaman film goes into. Like, it always felt like the DC Comics, some of the DC Comics films are trying to modernize a lot of these superheroes and their settings, whereas with Aquaman, it's always just felt like pure fantasy. Like you get to go to all kinds of crazy places. Like you get to go to this like underground prison that's run by what look like, skeleton monsters. You have a haven for like underwater criminals where you have a gangster fish voiced by Martin Short. So and then, like I said, like there's an octopus secret agent. There's glow in the dark seahorses. There's a grumpy brine king who constantly bitches about like how his arm got chopped off and it took like a year for it to grow back. So there's all this amazing stuff going on, but the film is zooming so fast past all of it, as though it's afraid that if it slows down enough, you're not going to take it as seriously. Which is kind of sad, because there's some stuff that really works here. Like, I like the settings that Aquaman and Orm visit. I like the dynamic they have. It felt like you needed a few more scenes to explore this, that you barely get like I said, I like the stuff with Aquaman and Orm, but you barely get anything else with any of the characters. Like, outside of a few scenes where Arthur is sharing a beer with Tom, you barely see him in the film. You don't even see like Mira for like the entire second act. She's pretty much just like kind of written out of the film at that point. She has a few bits of dialogue here and there. But like for a character who can manipulate water, you'd feel like you'd want to keep her around a lot more. Also, like, Nicole Kidman is mostly wasted in this film. As Arthur's mother, and then like Dolph Lundgren comes back as Nereus, and he's just barking out orders the whole time. Like he never has a moment to just kind of like, be a little cocky or, get in like a good one-liner here or there. Which highlights the biggest problem of the film, is that most of the dialogue that isn't the kind of character chemistry between Arthur and Orm is mostly just talking about Black Manta and the black trident that he's gotten his hands on, and the dark magic that it wields, and how if they burn up this magical artifact, that it's going to speed up climate change and it's going to destroy the earth. And they're constantly talking about different strategies and how to stop Black Manta, and the lore of all the Lost Kingdom. And it's just not as fun as all the little side stops along the way for this adventure, that it feels like it's wasting so much of its material. Like, you have Martin Short voicing this Jabba the Hutt style gangster among fish, and he doesn't really get that much time to like chew up the scenery. And it's like, when he shows up on screen, like I could recognize voice, like, okay, that's Martin Short. They're gonna find something fun to do with him, and they don't really. It's mostly just, it's strictly business throughout most of the film. It's like, look, we don't have time to mess around. We don't have time to have fun. We gotta stop Black Manta and save the planet. And everyone just kind of fits neatly into their roles, especially for Randall Park playing the scientist of Black Manta, who is just there to kind of like reluctantly go along with the villain until he gets a moment to realize, oh yeah, maybe blowing up the planet and killing babies to get that far isn't really a good idea. But Randall Park, like, he's mostly just, I would say he's wasted, but he's mostly used for what you would want to use him for in a superhero film, like the way that he's had a role in like the Ant-Man films. It's pretty much to that same degree. But it's like there's good stuff here. There's elements that I would like to see explored more. I like that there's amazing sights like Aquaman being rescued by an octopus that's riding a seahorse. Like, fun, fantastical stuff like that is kind of cool. And the fact that Aquaman can kind of have a little bit of commentary here and there and gets in a few one-liners, and some good bits along with like Patrick Wilson, who they play off each other pretty well for most of their scenes. I wanted more of that, and you don't really get it because we're just zooming to the next location and zooming to like, the next plot point and just like doling out exposition here that's really not that interesting. Like, I don't care all that much about the Black Trident or the Lost Kingdom. I do care more about the fact that, Aquaman and Orm are having like this fun back and forth dynamic about how they view the surface world. And I think even the film realizes too, because like the whole mid-credit sequence is just a payoff on a joke with Orm. And it's like, that's the good stuff. That's what you need more of in this film, and not just like just quick pacing as if to, like, avoid looking at all the cool stuff, like all the Atlantean traffic and the various sea creatures and how their society works and all the underwater sites and just like all the fun fantasy stuff here is just breezed by so quickly that you don't get a chance to appreciate it or the characters that occupy it. So, I mean, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, it needs breaks to make this film work. You would think that, for a film at the end of the DCEU where there's no other films to set up, that this film could just like take its time, have fun with its world, and just not be bound by the same restrictions that all the other DCEU films had to stay narrowly within. And to the film's credit, it's not bound by any other like DCEU cameos or like setting up future films that are never going to happen, so you don't have to worry about any of that. But really, for being at the end of the cinematic universe, you feel like it should end with less of a rush to get to the last scene and just having one last bit of fun with this version of Aquaman, because chances are we're probably not going to see another Aquaman movie for a pretty long time. So it's unfortunate, especially since you have James Wan directing here once again, and I think they gotta slow down. They gotta, like, these are fun fantasy worlds, but you gotta give us a chance to explore them and have fun with them, because it's just, when I see this film, it's just a lot of wasted potential because bits and pieces of it are fun. So yeah, The Lost Kingdom is pretty unfortunate end to the DCEU. So, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom is currently playing in theaters everywhere right now. And it'll probably remain that way for a few weeks, just because, like, it doesn't have big competition. It still has some competition that is probably going to dwarf it, but, we'll see. We'll see how it pans out in the next few weeks, just because, like, the DCEU films of this year have just been dreadful box office bombs. Okay. Well, let's talk about something a little bit more enticing. Let's talk about a fantasy film that takes its time. Okay. Got my notes up here. And we will review The Boy and the Heron in 3, 2, 1. So The Boy and the Heron is the latest film from Hayao Miyazaki. And it's another one of his, return films. Like, it always felt like, Miyazaki's, like, this is going to be the last film I do. Like, he said that with Princess Mononoke, and then he saw the current landscape of anime and said, I gotta do something more, so he hopped back in and did Spirited Away. So he stuck around at Studio Ghibli for a while, and then eventually he did The Wind Rises, which is all about, feeling like your creative control is coming to an end. So it felt fitting, 10 years ago that, him saying, oh, this is the last film. Okay, I'm done. This is it. And then, of course, nobody believed him, and he returned again, and he did The Boy and the Heron. And again, much like The Wind Rises, The Boy and the Heron is very much a fitting film if this is to be the end of Miyazaki's legacy. It's debatable whether it will be or not, but I mean, he's getting up there in years, and again, if he has to end on a film for his career, I think it helps that it's a film that it feels like he should end on a film that feels personal, that it's not just, like just simple wholesomeness, but that it's something that's coming from his heart, and that he has like something left to say in this world, and say it beautifully through his animation. And he actually really does with The Boy and the Heron. The film is set in 1943 Japan, and it follows a young kid called Mahito. And I think it's pronounced, Mahito, right? So this kid, Mahito, has endured the loss of his mother through a fire, and has ventured off with his father, with his new wife, in a new setting, at a new estate. And Mahito's not having it. And it's not so much that he's throwing a fit. It's just kind of like, he's feeling very quiet and distant from everything that's going on because so much is happening. Like, he's got to get used to his new mother, Natsuko, who's currently pregnant with another child. So Mahito's already feeling the pressure of, like, getting used to a new mom and getting used to a sibling. And his dad's away the whole time, and he's got to get used to a new school. So lots of pressure on this kid. That, it's just, it's a tough time for him. And you feel for him in this kind of like quiet, somber way. But then he notices that something weird is going on at the estate. Like, off in the distance, there is a tower. And the people who reside on the estate, they try not to talk about the tower that much. They bring up that, it was built by Mahito's granduncle. And that for some reason he disappeared, and that the tower was blocked off for many years. So of course, Mahito's a little bit curious about what's going on in that tower, wants to explore it a little bit more. And further pushing him to explore that is this talking heron. Or apparently it's a magical heron that it can apparently transform into a bit of a human being. It's weird. Like, it's a heron that, like, the human form comes up out of the mouth like some bizarre kind of half transformer type deal. And it's just like this very, like, grumpy heron who entices Mahito by saying, like, look, if you follow me, I can bring you back to your mom. Like, do you want to see your dead mom again? Because I know you've been having some dreams about her, and you might want to see her again for a little bit of closure. And so Mahito kind of, more or less kind of like follows into the tower, and the further that he gets inside the tower, he discovers this magical world of all these, like, mystical creatures, like other giant birds. There's these cute little pillowy type critters that are essentially souls going off to be born. There's differently aged people of familiar faces from Mahito's life, and there's also a kingdom of giant parakeets who want to eat human beings. So you do have kind of like this kind of a little bit of like Alice in Wonderland vibe going here, which I do appreciate that Miyazaki gives us a lot of time to get lost in this fantasy world, while it still carries this heavy thematic element about growing up and learning, like, to accept, like, grief, but also like a passing of time as well. Because, like, it's not in the same league as, like, something like Spirited Away, which is very much about, learning to grow up when you can't depend on parents. This film is more or less about kind of learning to accept the next generation and moving on when you've lost something. And that comes in both the form of Mahito losing his mother, but also with the granduncle, who, of course, they do find within the tower at one point, and they do question about why he built this particular place. But also, like, realizing that, this tower is not going to be here forever, and that the legacy that you might have built up, it's, like, you can leave it off to someone else, but they might not be ready to handle it, and that legacy could tumble down. And it's kind of one of those, it's like that gamble of life where you almost don't have much of a choice in who is going to be the next person to carry on for you. They might not carry on for you. They might just, grow up to do something else with their lives and not just, do the same thing as what was done before. And there's something that's both sad, but, like, very profound, and very comforting about realizing that. Because when you see that, when you get, like, up to that final scene when, like, Mahito's confronting the granduncle, you can very much sense, like, there's an aspect that, like, that's Miyazaki on the screen right there. That's Miyazaki watching him, pass off Ghibli, and, animation itself. So, like, the future of animators, and more or less not feeling like, like they'll be able to handle it. But if they don't, it's one of those, it's a matter of acceptance. It's like, some people might be able to carry on your legacy and keep something going that you've established and built for this long, for like, that's something that stood for the longest time and that you put all your passion into, but they might not be there for all of it. And, it's that sad truth about, when you get old, you might have built up a legacy for yourself. But after you pass on, there's only so much that you can leave and only so much that will last. Like if you built up a building and that's your legacy, that building, could be demolished by someone who buys the land. It could be obliterated by weather. It could just decay over time. And it's one of those things of accepting that you won't be here forever, and the stuff you leave behind may not be around forever either. And it's one of those things that like Mahito kind of learns, to accept this and grow as a kid, but also like, the older adults who, have to learn to let go and, like realize that, it's up to the next generation to write their own chapter. So very profound themes, but also just beautiful animation, like cute stuff here and there, like the cute little soul critters are fun, and the parakeets are hilarious just for how big they are and how they lumber around and how they want to eat humans, and there's this silly parakeet king here, voiced by Dave Bautista. The other thing I should have mentioned too is like the English dub for the film does feature some familiar names you might recognize, like you have Gemma-chan in there, you have you have Christian Bale playing Mahito's father. One of the most peculiar things I found about the film though is that when I was looking at what actors were going to be for the English dub, I saw Willem Dafoe on there, and I thought, okay, Dafoe is going to be the Heron, because I looked at the Heron. It's like this big nose, grumpy guy who doesn't want to be around this kid, so I figure he's gonna have a haggard voice, and he kind of does have that kind of grisly voice in the film, but that's not Willem Dafoe. The Heron is actually voiced by Robert Pattinson, and I found myself so fascinated. I found myself with like the same fascination when Illumination will choose like celebrity voices that you wouldn't expect to do a particular type of voice. Like I did not expect Robert Pattinson to be voicing the Gray Heron in this film. Willem Dafoe actually does voice one of the other birds very fittingly, but just having Pattinson in that role, it's almost unrecognizable. Like I had to like listen closely because like is that Pattinson? And it's like, no, that is kind of him. After I listened to it very closely after a while, so very impressive voice work there. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people do need to realize about this film is that it's a little bit more abstract than the other Ghibli films. Like it's not as firmly on the track as like Spirited Away or Princess Mononoke in terms of, like the story that you can follow and the bigger themes that it's encompassing. The Boy and the Heron is very much a film where the themes overtake much of the story, that most of the plot just kind of gets lost in this fantasy world while, Mahito goes on more of this this internal journey. And I think for some people that's going to be a little bit frustrating, especially for the fact that the film kind of has a little bit of a slow first act with establishing, Mahito's background and his current position in life. But honestly, the payoff here at the end is just so beautiful and sad, but like at the same time very, very uplifting, that it's very fitting if this is to be Miyazaki's final film. So it's another wonderful film from Hayao Miyazaki, and whether he retires or not, this is another fantastic film, and it'd be a great one to be his, and it'd be a great final film for his career. Very, very fitting. So The Boy and the Heron should be playing in a few places still. I think it's expanding a bit after it's gotten a bit of a warm reception. It has been one of the better performing Studio Ghibli films, that might not sound like the biggest praise, because most Studio Ghibli films, like even like the more popular ones like Spirited Away, did not open that large. Like they had good openings. Like I remember when Spirited Away opened up, it had a limited release around the same time as Disney's Treasure Planet, and this was around the same time that like Disney was also distributing the Ghibli films at the time. So it was Disney against Disney, and the Spirited Away, a film that was only released into a few theaters, was doing better business per theater than Treasure Planet was doing. Which and it made sense that they would later do the re-release around Oscar time, and that's how, you know, Spirited Away kind of built up its acclaim slowly over time, that it became one of the more popular Ghibli films. So, which was like, it was a little bit disappointing that, you know, that when you followed up with Howl's Moving Castle, and it didn't gain as much allure, but like fairly close. But yeah, Boy and the Heron opened pretty well, and I'm so glad, because it does deserve it. That film does deserve it. Let's talk about Wonka yet. Let's keep the good vibes going with another good film here. I'll save the worst films for last, just because I think, well, I still have my voice. I want to talk about the good stuff. Okay. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. So, Migration is the latest film from Illumination Animation, and I've never really been the biggest fan of Illumination's films, because I've always felt that their animated films are more like a patchwork of funny ideas that never come together well to make a great film. And I've seen this happen with all their films, with like, you know, like Despicable Me and The Secret Life of Pets, and even this year with the Super Mario Brothers movie. It's the same deal. It's just a whole bunch of like kind of funny gags that are pieced together and try to form this film from like a series of vignettes. And they mostly don't work, because I feel like, okay, these kind of work, but, you know, it's kind of at the sacrifice of the story, and I'm not really getting as engaged with these characters when they keep getting distracted by all these asides. But here's the thing. With Illumination, I don't think that formula is doomed if they can find the right film or the right type of genre for their animated films to make that formula work. And they've finally done it with Migration. Migration works because it's a road trip film. And that's the perfect genre for this type of storytelling, because road trip films are all about the asides and the detours and the weird offshoots that the main characters get sent towards on their journey, while they can grow as characters throughout. So I was kind of looking forward to this film, hoping that it would do that, and sure enough, it did. The film is about a family of ducks, a mallard family that's leaded by the patriarch Mac, voiced by Kumail Nanjiani. And Mac has kind of like lived this very like sheltered life, and he wants to like scare his kids into like staying within their pond environment. Like they don't fly up in the sky. They don't venture off to any like new rivers or ponds or anything like that. They all stay put. Like he wants to make sure that his kids, like his son Dax and his daughter Gwen, are taken care for and not killed by predators, which is an understandable parental concern, but one that he instills with a lot of fear in his children. And it's something that his wife Pam, played by Elizabeth Banks, is getting a bit tired of. She's like, yeah, okay, you know, I get that you want to protect our family, but, you know, we're in this pond the whole time. We don't get to go anywhere. We don't have adventures. We're bored, and we want to leave. And they stick with Mac because, you know, it's, you know, he's the dad, and, you know, they got to recognize him, and they don't want to, you know, force him to do anything. But eventually, after some coaxing, and then, you know, Mac talking with his brother Dan, with Uncle Dan, voiced by Danny DeVito, and it's Danny DeVito doing the voice that you'd expect Danny DeVito to do for this type of character. Mac realizes that, oh yeah, maybe we should get out there more, because like I don't want to end up like Dan, as like this grumpy fat old duck who's, who just seems like a cynic. And so the whole family ventures off, including Dan, after some convincing from Gwen. And so they have a whole bunch of unique detours while they make a bit of a migration off to Jamaica, where they've heard some other ducks are heading towards. So there's a lot of fun asides for these characters. The first one in particular, I was hooked right from the beginning because you have Carol Kane voicing a heron called Heron. How's that for Dr. Seuss rhyme in there? Who lives in this kind of like shack in this swamp, and it's all very, very creepy. Like she's got big eyes. It seems like she's gonna eat these ducks with how she presents herself and like her swampy abode where she hangs out, where it's like dark and rainy, and if you get like the sensation that this is a horror film and she's gonna eat them. Later, they end up going to New York and they meet a pigeon leader called Chump, played by Awkwafina, who, a lot of people like complain like Awkwafina, doesn't really fit for some of her roles. But here she's perfectly cast as just this kind of grumpy bird of New York who wants to assert her dominance and kind of put on this like this intimidating gangster motif, which really does work for this type of film. You have Keegan-Michael Key playing Delroy, a parrot who helps them on their journey to Jamaica. Not a whole lot they do with this character. He's mostly just there to, put on, be like the fun little guide who gets them over to Jamaica. And then you have David Mitchell playing Gugu, a yoga instructor / cult leader for a series of ducks who have been duped into this farm where they fatten them up and then sell them off to a chef. And there's a running bit with like this evil chef in New York who wants to just track down ducks and apparently has all this money to get back at like those one ducks in his kitchen. And apparently this is all the guy does. He has like this giant helicopter and he has this fantastic kitchen in New York, but all he wants to do is get back at these ducks because I don't know, everyone needs a hobby, I guess. But what I will say, one of the things that I love the most about this film is just the way that they establish the locations and just how beautiful they look and how the film gives us time to appreciate them. Like there's all these like very sunny rural areas. Like I love the details they place in New York. I love how gorgeous they portray Jamaica once they get there. And then, there's no like second guessing about what happens when they get to Jamaica. It's just like a beautiful sight that they finally accomplish their goal and they get to lavish in this paradise. And it's kind of beautiful to see the way that it unfolds in animation here. The voice work too is also really good. There was never a moment where it felt like the characters were like getting on the nerves here. I felt like they had just enough good material within the dialogue that they were playing off each other fairly well. The character arcs here are fairly good. Like they're not great, but because like I feel like a few characters get sidestepped here. Like Dan is mostly just there as cynical commentary, and Gwen is mostly just there to be the cute mascot who gives people hugs, and she speaks in that adorable child voice. There's a few arcs here where you have like Mac learning to be more adventurous, Pam learning to be more trusting, and Dax learning to show some initiative and show some more bravery, as opposed to just cheering other people on from the sidelines, actually doing something. And there's some fairly impressive sequences here where, like, they're being chased by this evil chef, and when they're trying to escape from other birds in the skies, and when they're, like, stumbling across New York and making their way through traffic. So all these little vignettes here actually really work, and for the most part, the character arcs kind of hold consistent throughout the film. You do feel like there's a building up of the characters here more than any other Illumination film has had, where it just feels like they're bookends. Just like, okay, here's where the characters start. We'll just find some busy work for them to do, and then by the end, they'll kind of learn their lesson more or less by the final act of the film. And here it felt more like it felt like a more grounded animated film for Illumination, despite being the same formula again. And it actually has some fairly good animation here. I think it's mostly kept on track by director Benjamin Renner, who previously directed a cute animated film called Ernest and Celeste. And here he surprisingly brings a lot of that creativity into this film that could have easily just been another forgettable Illumination film that was just like a patchwork of, like silly stuff that happens, and then, the character arcs don't really pay off that well by the end. And here it just works. It's finally like, this is the Illumination animated film I wanted. It's not that animated film that's gonna like blow like Pixar and DreamWorks out of the water, where it's just like, oh, they better watch out because now their films are better than now Illumination is better than Pixar and DreamWorks. It's not. It's like, this is just like, it's a pleasing film that uses its animation style well. It finds fun stuff to do with its detours. It finds a comfy home within the road trip genre. So yeah, it's just like, it's, don't get ahead of the curve here, but I am pleased to see that, I'm very pleased to see that Illumination has delivered on an animated film that actually works and doesn't just feel like a slew of good ideas that don't make for a good film. Migration is a good film. So Migration is currently playing in theaters, and it'll probably be there for a bit. It's an animated film for kids that, is more mainstream, so it'll have some legs. So yeah, it'll probably have a good shot. All right. Hang on here. I got to get up more of my notes here. Okay. 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 All right. Sorry, I just had to check something there. Okay, now what should we talk about next? Go further down the line here. We'll talk about Wonka. My voice is holding up a little better than I thought it would. Like, we got about 3 more, actually 4 more films to get through. Might have to cut it down, but yeah, we'll get there. All right, let me get my notes up here, and we will talk about Wonka. So here we go in just 1 minute. Okay. Sorry, I wanted to clear my throat and do that off screen. So, for the benefit of the stream. Okay, so here we go with Wonka in 3, 2, 1. So, Wonka is the musical prequel to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and it establishes a younger Willy Wonka who is just starting out to be a chocolatier. He's played by Timothée Chalamet, and he does, Chalamet does bring a lot of charm and spirit to this character. Like, it doesn't feel like he's just trying to, emulate the same, types of Willy Wonkas that we've gotten before with, Gene Wilder or Johnny Depp. Although, if you look at it, it does look like he's, style-wise, that they're trying to go with more of the Gene Wilder type. Especially for the fact that, this is very much a British film. It's directed by Paul King of Paddington fame. And much like the Paddington films, which have this kind of almost kind of whimsical wholesomeness to those pictures, just like how they're beautifully framed, and all the characters have this kind of cute and quirky side to them, and they all kind of and the heroes and the protagonists, they are all people who mean well and want to find the best in people and bring that out. King kind of does the same thing with Wonka here. He basically makes Willy Wonka into Paddington, just this visitor from out of town who comes in and just wants to do right by other people and just wants to be, a a little gentleman and, just sell his own chocolate. And he arrives with barely any money. He does have a lot of interesting contraptions that he's, amassed on his journey to find, the best ingredients for his chocolate. But once he arrives in this European city where he's seeking to, stake his claim among all the other chocolatiers to, be a better businessman and sell wondrous chocolates to people all over the city, he finds himself on hard times. He gets taken in by this swindling pair of people who run a household where they dupe people into staying them and then overcharge them and then force them to work off their debt with all the labor they have going on in their home. And that couple is they're played by Olivia Colman and Tom Davis, and they're perfect swindlers. They can see Wonka is someone that we can easily dupe because he has a good heart and we can exploit that. But at the same time, it's fun to see kind of Wonka overcome all this because he is smart enough to figure out ways to kind of make work go faster and find a way to sneak off and go sell his wares. And also kind of just, inspire other people. At one point he befriends an orphan called Noodle, played by Kala Lane. And he basically tells him his life story, what his mother meant to him and his dreams of selling chocolate and trying to, make the world a little bit more magical and fun for everybody. But of course, there's a lot of forces working against Wonka in order for that dream to, not come true immediately. Because you would think that, guy who comes into town and he's got this chocolate that can make people float in the air for a bit, and that it has all these amazing flavors that come into your mouth right before you start lifting off the ground, that'd be an easy sell. He'd be a chocolatier in no time. But of course, there's corrupt figures working against him. You have Arthur Slugworth, played by Patterson Joseph, who's pretty good in the role. And then he's joined by his other conspiring businessmen, played by Matt Lucas and Matthew Bainton. And you might recognize, I mentioned, Olivia Colman and Matt Lucas, and there's a few other notable names here from other British films and TV series. You might recognize a few familiar faces from Downton Abbey. Rowan Atkinson is in there as a religious figure, and even a few faces you might not expect to see in a Paul King film. You have Keegan-Michael Key playing this corrupt police official who's addicted to chocolate. So all these forces are working to make sure that Wonka will not become a hit. And of course, Wonka's got to use his smarts and his cunning and his amazing abilities with making candy to, kind of prove himself, but also save the day so that he doesn't leave other people behind at the expense of becoming a better businessman. And for the most part, this film actually kind of works. The musical numbers, they're okay. They're not as memorable as the 1970s version of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I doubt many people are going to remember as much of these songs, but I will give the film credit that the music by Joby Talbot and Neil Hannon, they do feel like they're fairly original songs. They do feel like you're not just they're just repeating all the same stuff that's been done in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, or even Tim Burton's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. These do feel like films that could work within this film, and they don't so much remind you of previous iterations, which is a good thing. It's just kind of sad, though, that, by about the halfway point in the film, or on the second act, they throw an Oompa Loompa into the mix. And played by Hugh Grant in in that weird CGI makeup that he's complained about. But it feels like he's kind of like an afterthought, almost kind of like he was just placed in there because oh, what do people recognize from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory? Well, do you have an Oompa Loompa? Well, maybe, and they just toss one in there. I will give the film credit, Hugh Grant does have some funny lines in there. He plays it up about as much as he played up his character in Paddington 2. But they don't really find a whole lot to do with him in the film, where it really does feel like he's an afterthought. Especially since he's really not needed, since most of this film can work well enough on its own without reminding you about, like, the other iterations of Willy Wonka, or trying to, like, set the stage for everything that would happen with, you know, building up the adult Willy Wonka. It very much felt like its own thing. That mostly works because, I liked Wonka as a character here, who's a little bit more, wholesome and charming, rather than being kind of like, a little bit like quietly cynical about the world. Here he's like, he feels like a much younger, much hopeful person. That's very much distinct from like the older Wonkas that we've got in the other film adaptations. So for the most part, the film works. Like, it's not a great film. Like I said, the songs are not that memorable, and the Oompa Loompa is very much an afterthought. But for the most part, the music, it's pleasing to listen to. The way that the film is framed, it's very, very beautiful, very whimsical. It's fun to look at, and it does have a good enough heart and a charming spirit that I think for the most part, I was with the film. It's like, okay, you know what, it's a fun little diversion. It's not gonna, it's not going to overtake like Gene Wilder's Willy Wonka or Johnny Depp's Willy Wonka, but it's its own thing, and it's having fun with it. And it's just like eating candy. It's not that good for you. It's not going to give you much, but sometimes it's nice just to have something a little sweet now and then. And Wonka is very much that. It's a sweet little decent film. So Wonka should be playing in a few theaters here and there. I think it'll have a little bit of legs. Okay, I want to talk about the last great film that we're going to talk about today. All right, here we go. With Past Lives. And keep an eye out, because it's going to be on a lot of people's top 10 lists this year. All right, here we go with Past Lives in 3, 2, 1. So, Past Lives is a romantic drama that is very sincere and sad, but also very relatable and comforting. Because it focuses on a thought that is going to be crossing the minds of a lot of people who are going to be turning 40, or people in their late 30s who are just about at that point, which is, looking back on your life and questioning what could have been. Because, when you grow older, a lot of people do have that thought in their head about, when I was this age, if I'd gone this route instead of the other one, if I had formed a friendship with this person, if I didn't move away from here, if I pursued this job instead of a different one, or if I stuck with, this person I was in love with, would my life have turned out differently? And these are thoughts that are hung onto within Past Lives, within the two characters of Nora Moon and Hae Sung, played by Greta Lee and Teo Yu, respectively. So the film starts out with both of them as little children, growing up in South Korea, and the way that they connect with each other, it seems like they were going to be a couple. Like, like Nora was like a girl who, kind of like depended on Hae for a lot of stuff, and and even like their parents could see like, oh, these two connect really well, like they're bound to end up as a couple. They're sure to have a good relationship. But then Nora ends up moving to Canada at a very young age, and the two of them just kind of split apart, and there's not much they can do at that point. So, they just kind of go their separate ways, and go off for different lives. And they grow up, and Hae ends up going into the military, and Nora ends up becoming a writer. And when they become older, when they get into like their 20s, they find themselves connecting over the internet, specifically because Sung requests, he puts out like the social media requests that, hey, there used to be this girl I knew in South Korea, anyone know her? I'm kind of interested in her. And then the two of them just connect over voice chat. And voice and video chat, and they're happy to see each other. They tell each other about how their lives have changed. Like Nora has now moved to New York, so they have much different lives in much different settings. They reconnect for a bit, but then eventually Nora decides that, I don't know if this can work out, so why don't we just put our relationship on hold for right now and not contact each other for a while. And so about 12 years pass, and then after 12 years, like, the two of them have grown a little bit. Like, Nora has now married a guy called Arthur, played by Jean Magaro. And Hay has kind of gotten out of a relationship that kind of ended with him, kind of a bit bitter and, trying to find something else to do with his life. So he decides that, what, why don't I just go to New York and visit with Nora and just, see if there's anything there still. And it would just be a fun chance to reconnect. And so for most of the film, it's mostly just Nora and Sung are just connecting with each other, just catching up on old times. They talk about Korea. They speak in Korean around each other. They talk about how things have changed. What they remember from childhood, how they view the world and their different perspectives, and just getting caught up in this kind of like quiet way. And I love how there's a little bit of like a slow but contemplative pacing to how they reconnect. Like the moment when they meet face to face in New York for the first time in like 12 years, there's this kind of like quiet moment where they just kind of like let that moment of nostalgia just kind of like wash over them, and you see like these little moments of sincerity and smirking and giggling across their face. They're just like, hey, it's you. It's the person I used to know, and I get to catch up with you on old times. It's like meeting, it's basically meeting an old childhood friend. But as they continue meeting each other, they get the sensation that that they start realizing that, yeah, we were meant to be together. That's what our parents thought. And here's the thing. A lesser film might have taken this concept and decided that, Nora is just going to like dump Arthur because, he's trying to get engaged with like more of the Korean language and the culture. But he still feels like he's struggling. Like he still feels like he's like locked out of some of Nora's life. So you think that, Nora and Sung are going to reconnect and, they're going to form a romance and they're going to run off together and, they're going to have that wonderful romance that everyone thought they were going to have. But the film doesn't settle on that easily. It feels like a very much a realistic portrayal of how this reunion would go down. Because Sung also meets Arthur, and they speak together, and they have like, a night out on the town with like food and drink, and they try to connect with each other. But ultimately, what makes the film work is just like how Nora and Sung kind of come to this somber realization that the lives that they thought they were going to have together are gone now, because like, it's been like 12 years since they last spoke. They're at different points in their life. They have a different perception of the world. And the important thing is, like, they're not the same people anymore. It's like, yeah, like 12 to 24 years ago, they would have most likely been a couple, but that time has passed, and that's not them anymore. And the person, the people that they once were are gone. They're dead, and they're not coming back, and they just have to be the person that they are in the moment and grow with what they have, and they can't go back to that part of their lives again. And it's such a sad notion and feeling, but also one that is very earnest and makes and it's approached with the sincerity where it recognizes that yes, this is the cold reality and you do have to face it. And Nora kind of realized that. She almost kind of like bluntly states like, look, I'm not the same Nora and you're not the same Sung. We're way different people now, and it would never work out between us because we spent too much time apart and we're two different people. And she says this kind of like matter-of-factly, but soon after her departure from Sung, she just kind of breaks down and just cries because it's sad, and it's important to recognize that, yeah, it is a sad part of life. It's a part of life that you accept, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt, and that, it's okay to let that part of yourself feel that hurt. When when you realize that something that you once had is no longer there anymore. And I think going even further, like, it's not even just a matter of, just this romance. I think it's a matter of just like the perception of time in general, that the person that you once were, when you were in grade school, or when you just got out of college, or when you were just starting out on a job, when you get to that level, when you're in like your upper 30s, early 40s, you are no longer that type of person anymore. You're completely different. You move on and you grow and you become something a whole lot more. And it's exciting to realize that, but also, there's some sadness in, moving on from, a life that you can like look back on. Like, you can't really, you can speculate on the future. You can have fun with the, what you don't know about it, but you mostly know everything about your past. So, having full knowledge of what you used to know, you kind of want to go back there. You kind of want to relive it. And that's where you end up asking these questions of, what if I went with point A instead of point B? And it's a fact of life. You can't go back. You can't rewind. You can't recapture that same person because they're gone. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking, but it's deeply beautiful in the way that this film just kind of accepts it. And the way that it's framed is just like the beautiful ways they find to shoot New York and just frame this couple. And the music by Christopher Bear and Daniel Rawson is just so sincere and beautiful and just amazing to get lost within. That there's just something so profound, just comforting about a film like this that can accept this, this kind of like existential dread we have about, becoming something more than we once was, instead of just, going back and reliving the past that, that we can never revisit. So, I'll admit it, I got a bit teared up by the end of this film. The film went hard to that degree. So yeah, it's very much a very heartbreaking film. So it's a bit of a, like, I don't want to like write it off as easily as like a tearjerker, because the stuff that it's tapping into here is not just so simplistic as just a romance that doesn't work out. It's something more than that. It's something deep. It's something profound. And the fact that this is the directorial debut of Celine Song is just amazing. It's a beautiful, sad, and just a wonderful film that kind of like recognizes all the joys and the pains that come with life and just lets them unfold just amazingly on the screen. So Past Lives should be available on VOD right now everywhere. Go check it out. Okay, so getting to the end here. I can feel my voice cracking out. So we're going to do some quick reviews here. Very, 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 very quick ones. Okay, so Color Purple. You're probably going to see a little bit of a words buzz here. This is a musical version of the historical drama about the woman who was like sold into a relationship, and who was raped and forced to have children. You might remember it as that film adaptation from the 1980s, which was a very hard film to get through with like its historical depictions of racism and misogyny. But it's weird because like it was turned into a Broadway musical, and the Broadway musical is having not seen it, I kind of pieced that together from this film, and I could see how it might work because like with a musical, it's easy to get lost within the material, and I know that like a lot of people are going to be questioning the film, like, I don't know, do you think this material is going to work for a musical? But when you consider what some musicals have been based around with, like, stuff like Les Mis and the weirdness of Cats, like you could kind of understand it. I was okay with the film. I think like the musical numbers are not like the lyrics are not that memorable. Like they're mostly just very expositional and just like repeating the most of like the same stuff that we've already heard about some of the characters. Like at one point they're building up this celebrity who's coming to town who's gonna sing up a storm, and she's a party animal. It's mostly just reiterating that same notion over and over and over with lyrics that are not that catchy or memorable. That being said, I think the film does have a good staging. The musical sequences are more interesting for how they're staged than the actual songs that are performed, which I think is a bigger credit to this film. I get the feeling like this material works better as a film than it did as a Broadway play, unless you have some incredible set design going for it, because there is within this film. In particular, I found it fascinating that at one point the central character is singing on what's essentially her fantasy of a giant record player, which is just beautifully set up. I love the way that it's set up in this film, even if I can't really remember the songs all that well here. But some pretty good performances here, and I do think that the ending comes together well with a very fitting song to tie it all together, where it doesn't feel like it's inappropriate. That being said, it does go on a bit long, especially for songs that are highly expositional. So be aware, it's 2.5 hours, and you can really feel it with like certain scenes. It's like, okay, this did not have to be a musical number. Like at one point when they're like building a house for like they're building like a new juke joint. There's a song about like building, and it's like it's very brief, and it doesn't really, for lack of a better term, build up to anything within that scene. So it's like, I don't know if you needed this scene. It looks nice, and the performers are great, and it's kind of fun to see like a bunch of construction workers dancing around and with wood and tools. It's kind of neat. But the song, you feel like it's like, okay, this feels more like padding, as in like, okay, a few minutes have passed, let's get to the next song. So yeah, it does feel very padded in a few of those scenes, but for the most part, like Coleman Domingo and just the entire cast here, including a surprise cameo by Whoopi Goldberg in one scene. They're all pretty good in these roles. They all inhabit them in that kind of like, in a way that's like not as over the top as Broadway, but like close to that level of kind of like projecting and dominating the screen. So yeah, for the most part, the color purple as a musical works as a musical. In terms of getting its central story across, I feel like it's most of it pretty well. From like, I've never read the book, but I have seen the original film from the 80s. And on that level, it's a fine musical adaptation. But again, these musical sequences, a lot of them do feel like there's too many, and they're not as memorable in terms of the lyrics and how they're staged. So it's a decent musical, a decent one. And finally, okay, I'll put a little bit of effort into this one. Put a little bit of effort into Rebel Moon, just because I'm a little bit frustrated with this film. Okay. Last one. Yeah, I can feel losing my voice there. All right. Here we go in 3, 2, 1. Oh, shoot, I forgot my notes. Hang on. There we go. All right, in 3, 2, 1. So, Rebel Moon is the latest film from Zack Snyder, or as Zack Snyder would prefer to call it, Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire. So this film is basically the Seven Samurai, in terms of its familiar narrative. It's a group of like mercenaries coming together to defend a village that's being hoarded and attacked by these evil people who want to take it over and steal all the resources and leave nothing for the poor villagers. So it's that same story of Seven Samurai, but except it's within a sci-fi setting. Even though we've already gotten Seven Samurai within a sci-fi setting, it's a film called Battle Beyond the Stars. And it's silly. It's a silly film. Like, it's got like, ridiculous alien designs, and it's got like starships that have boobs. But I mean, Roger Corman produced film. But you know what? It's kind of fun. I like the musical score there. The ship designs are bizarre and the alien designs are weird. And I kind of had fun with that film. I will say that I had more fun with Battle Beyond the Stars than I did with Rebel Moon. Because Rebel Moon spends so much time on its lore and just finding busy work for all the characters to do in this Seven Samurai scenario that it really doesn't put that much effort into characters. Like, the whole story is just like, you have this, the Imperium of, like, the Mother World, which are basically space Nazis. They're Nazis that want to control the universe and have their grip over all these planets. And they come to this one planet and they assault these farmers and say, give us all your food so that we can keep this hunt up for, some people who have killed our glorious king. And the farmers, having gotten fed up with how the soldiers are treating them, decide to fight back. And they realize, oh, we're going to need an army to defend this village. Let's go off across the galaxy and find some more mercenaries that we could hire. That premise can work if you build up the characters and you make them interesting and you make them likable and you kind of root for them to win and save the day. The problem is that Rebel Moon spends so much time just talking about the Imperium and the Mother World and the various locations and setting up these very, very bland tropes that are approached on like a surface level and rarely explored. Like you have Sofia Boutella playing Cora, who's like one of the key space farmers who like goes off to find more people to help out with her village. She's a good warrior, but she's just kind of determined to save her village, and there's not. I mean, she has like a history of working with the Imperium and realizing like how vicious they are. But she mostly she doesn't talk about it much. And when she does, it's like these very bland backstories. It's like, oh, I was on the battlefield and I saw this combat and I remember, like this person might be a key to, stopping the Imperium and all this like Mother World junk that we can stop. And it's like, that's all she has time for, because then the film goes to the next planet and establishes the next setting where, we get all these various characters. Like you have, Titus, who's like this drunk warrior played by Jimon Hosoon, which I love this actor, but like he's wasted in this film. Like they establish him as a drunk, and there's rarely a moment where you believe that he's like drowning within the bottle, that he's a proper. It's mostly just Jimon just acting as he's always acted in his other roles. He's not even. There's barely a scene where he's given a chance to act like a drunk through it. Who do you else? You have Donna Bie as Nemesis, who's this kind of like cyborg swordsman who basically wields lightsabers. She's like this vicious, assassin who wields lightsabers, and she cuts up some evil spider lady in one scene. Who are some other ones? You have Stas Nair plays Tarek, who's essentially this Native American slave who's keen with animals, and he's able to escape his slavery by training one of the animals, but then the animals will turn on people if he makes them to. And you have Anthony Hopkins voicing a robot, and you have Charlie Hunnam as a pilot mercenary. You have Ray Fisher as another warrior. You have Michael Huisman as another farmer, and they're all just bland characters that are just set up more for what they do combat wise than anything that they do as characters. Like they don't have any chemistry here. They have none. They're mostly just they're talking about themselves, or they're talking about the Imperium, or they're talking about backstories in the dullest way possible, in these ugly these ugly dusty settings of like all these different planets. That don't really feel like they have. Like, I'm glad that the film puts up subtitles for each one of the planets, because they all just look like generic sci-fi backgrounds. Like, you could barely tell them apart here, and it doesn't help that the fact that like a lot of this film feels like it's world building, trying to establish like, okay, here's this fleet, here's this person, here's this rank. Here's this planet, here's this city of this planet, here are these weapons, here's this type of mercenary, here are these type of soldiers. And I think a lot of the film's like laziness can be attributed to like the central villain here of Atticus Noble, this kind of like, space Nazi who kind of works for the Imperium, who goes around investigating all these places. He's just like that intimidating Nazi who comes in, takes off his gloves, and just, you know, it's just like a few lines of dialogue away from like shooting someone in the face. And he's played by Ed Skrein, which he does an okay job in this role, but the costume he wears here, like, man, I want to apologize to how, if I ever complained that like the space, you know, Nazi uniforms of Starship Troopers was too on the nose, I apologize, because Atticus Noble in this film is like, they're not even trying to make him look sci-fi. He looks like just a straight up Nazi with like the Nazi haircut. He's wearing a white shirt with a black tie, and he's wearing and when he's not wearing that, he's basically wearing like a typical Nazi uniform. Like, this guy looks like he just wandered off the set of like The Zone of Interest. It's like there's no effort putting in to make him look like a different type of intimidating, you know, sci-fi space Nazi. It's just like, it's so lazy. And the fact that like that is basically the tone of the entire film. It's 2.5 hours of not even finishing the Seven Samurai story. It's just setting up all the characters before they come to the village, but all that setup is just busy work. It's just like, okay, there's a little bit of a double cross, but for the most part, just like, we go to this planet, we explore this region, and we do this bargaining to get this character, and it's just, you don't get to like any of these characters. There's nothing for them to do where you actually like them beyond what they do in like fight scenes that are not that well staged. Especially, like, I will give like Snyder credit, he does like limit himself a little bit on the slow motion here, but the way that a lot of these fights are staged is just bizarre. Like, at one point, like, there's a platform that's like cut off by a spaceship smashing into it, but somehow the ship must be like razor thin for one scene, because one of the characters is able to slide under the ship right before it smashes down. Either that person is advanced at like, you know, skidding across like metal for long distance, or that ship is razor thin. It's just, it's so like that's like the one moment of ridiculousness, because everything else is just kind of just bland, you know, getting lost in the lore and the mythology of this world, that it's not that interesting or enticing. And at 2.5 hours doesn't finish the Seven Samurai story. It just gets up to establishing all the characters who are going to come and save this village, and then you'll have to wait for part 2. But apparently Snyder has said that, you know, this version is rated PG-13, which is weird because it feels like a little bit of a hard PG-13 for like all the violence that happens. But Snyder says, no, there's an R-rated cut in which there are more scenes, and it's a much different film. So chances are there's probably like a 3 to 4 hour cut of this film coming down the pike, in addition to part 2 of this film, which is probably going to be 2.5 hours. So you're looking at a combined total of 5 hours to tell this space Seven Samurai film. Which, to clarify, Seven Samurai itself is a long film, but it's only 3.5 hours. So not only, maybe Snyder will stick the landing with part 2, but it's not looking good, especially because I'm so bored throughout most of this film. But, you know, when all is said and done, Seven Samurai is not going to be the better film, but it's also going to be the shorter film at 3.5 hours. So yeah, if you want to see a better version of this type of film, like if you've never watched The Seven Samurai, or The Magnificent Seven, the Western spin-off, or the Battle Beyond the Stars, the sci-fi spin-off, or even the remakes of The Seven Samurai, even like the remake of The Magnificent Seven and like Samurai 7, the anime, watch any of those, because they do a much better job with this story than Rebel Moon, which just kind of just slogs through this dreary, boring character, you know, lack of character throughout this film is just abysmal. And it's so dreary and boring that even when there's like a decently staged fight scene, it feels like too little too late. And it's like, I really don't care about any of these characters, and I don't really have all that much invested in this world or this lore with how generic it all looks. It's just a bland, forgettable sci-fi film. And I'm glad that, like, part 2 is coming out fairly quick. Like, it's coming out in, like, April. Because it's going to have to, lest people, like, forget about part 1, too. Especially because, like, I had to remind myself who the villain was. Like, Atticus Noble, the space Nazi dude. Because everyone's still like, oh, this is the... You know, a lot of people who are big Snyder fans are like, oh, this is the best villain of a 2023 film. It's like... Do you even remember his name? I had to remind myself who his name was, and I watched the film. And he's fairly prominent in the film, but he's just such a bland and boring character that I didn't care for him. So yeah, it's not a good film. It's Space Seven Samurai, and if you've already seen Battle Beyond the Stars, you've already seen the better version of that film. So yeah, Rebel Moon is just so boring. So Rebel Moon is playing on Netflix. All right, so let's play out some outro music here. And we'll get into a quick recap of the films we reviewed on today's stream. It's a little loud there. There we go. Okay, so what did we review? We reviewed Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. An okay fantasy superhero film, but it needs to slow down so that I can appreciate a lot more of its fantastical underwater world and not be as bogged down in the kind of lukewarm plot about Black Manta wanting to destroy the world and get its revenge on Aquaman. Reviewed The Boy and the Heron, the seemingly last film from Hayao Miyazaki. Another banger from Miyazaki, a great film about contemplating legacy and coming to terms with grief and moving on with your life and learning to accept mortality. I reviewed Rebel Moon, Zack Snyder's new action Seven Samurai in Space film for Netflix, which is not Battle Beyond the Stars, because Battle Beyond the Stars is a much better film, and Rebel Moon is just a boring slog that can't even finish the Seven Samurai narrative within 2.5 hours. It is a very dreary, very boring part 1. We also reviewed Wonka, the latest film from Paul King, a prequel to Willy Wonka. Not a great film, but and it doesn't have the best musical numbers, but it's charming, it's wholesome, and it does have a little bit of that magic left over from the Paddington films that Paul King is known for, so it's a nice little wholesome treat. I reviewed The Color Purple, a musical adaptation of the historical drama based on the novel and the film of the same name, as well as the Broadway play. Not a bad musical. It's beautifully staged. It has some fine performances. It's just that the lyrics are fairly forgettable, and it's a little bit padded here and there at 2.5 hours. But if you're willing to stick with it, there's some fine performances and some good set pieces worth watching for. I reviewed Migration, the latest film from Illumination, a patchwork of funny ideas that actually works really well here for being a road trip movie. I think Illumination has kind of found the type of genre that works for their form of animated storytelling. And I reviewed Past Lives, the film of two Koreans who come together after over 12 years of being apart and come to the realization that they're never going to be the same people who they were before, with both a truthful and sad realization about how, you know, you can't go back to the past. It is definitely one of the year's best films. Go check it out. So of those films, Past Lives is currently available on VOD. The ones playing in theaters right now are Migration, The Color Purple, Wonka, The Boy and the Heron, and Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. And if you'd like to endure Rebel Moon, it is currently playing on Netflix. It's the biggest film on Netflix right now. Can't miss it. So, if you'd like more reviews like these, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. We will have early reviews as well. And I'm in the process, I'm very close to finishing all the films that I was going to see this year, to assembling my top 10 list. I was going to have it out earlier, but I've just been a little bit backlogged right now. But it is coming. I do know some films for sure that are going to be on that list. And I will make a video about it soon, so you'll want to stick around and figure out which are the must-see films of this year. And there are a few films that will actually be expanding in January. So films that are still going to be coming out that are going to be worth seeing. So if you would like to read my movie reviews, you can go to movieswithmark.com or filminquiry.com or twincitiesgeek.com. Catch up on all the latest reviews. So, I will be back in about a week or two, and we will talk about the latest films coming out in January, maybe do a little bit of a recap of the best of the year films, and we'll be talking about, it's January, so we always get a new horror film, so we will talk about the new film, Night Swim. So, look forward to that in the future, and I will see you all next time. So, have a great 2024, everybody.